So he's here for us to talk about religion minority. And Mas Ulil, we have with us the MHRD student. Where are the MHRD students? We have them from Indonesia, from Myanmar, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Are you okay now? I heard that you had an accident yesterday. Good to have you back here. We have, where is Ratwa? We have one from Egypt and other countries. Also, we have students from the Faculty of Public Sciences. We have students from the Netherlands, Japan, Korea, from the US, from Australia, from everywhere, and specialists from non-students. Basically, we'll ask them to provide some basic ideas of regionality in Indonesia and the experiences we have in Indonesia. And by the way, this session is streamed online, so we are going to be on Facebook. So, the time is yours. We have.
How long did I speak?
You can start with half an hour, then
okay.
We start the session.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. So first of all, I would like to thank my colleague Mas Ghaffar for inviting me to share with you my thought, insight, and experience dealing with minority rights and minority groups in Indonesia. Before I speak further, I would like to introduce to you a little bit about what I'm doing and have done before with regard to the issue that we are discussing today. I am and was active in interreligious and interfaith dialogue with many organizations in Indonesia. I am the current director of the organization called Indonesian Conference on Religion and Peace. This is an organization that was founded in 2000 by many leading interfaith dialogue in Indonesia, including the former President Gus Dur, Mr. Abdurrahman Wahid. Yeah. So through this entity and other organizations, I have been active and engaged in interfaith dialogues, and part of the job or thing that I have done was first of all to promote interreligious dialogue in Indonesia, and then doing some advocacies, legal and otherwise, for the minority groups that was subject to many discrimination, harassment, persecution, and so forth. Yeah. So that's a little bit about me as a person. My name is Ulil Abshar Abdallah. So the topic of my presentation is about religious minority groups in Indonesia. This particular issue is one of the burning issues that everybody discuss, talks, and even debate each other among Indonesian, the issue of the religious minorities or religious minority groups. When we talk about religious or religious minority groups in Indonesia today, it is mostly related to the issue of certain groups. Yeah. There are groups within Islam and there are groups also outside Islam. So we are talking here about two types of minorities, Islamic minorities and non-Islamic minorities. Islamic minorities include groups like Shiite people, Ahmadiyya, the Ahmadiyya movement. This is a movement that came from India to Indonesia. We have an Indian student here? Or Bangladeshi? Yes, okay. So you know Ahmadiyya, I guess, So we have Ahmadiyya groups. We have also some other Islamic groups, but they consider no longer as part of Islam, but they spring out of Islam. So they started as a Muslim group, but they split out and then emerge as a different or independent groups. It's called Gafatar. So Gafatar, this is also other religious minority group that became a big issue 2 years ago. There was thousands of Gafatar members in Kalimantan who were evicted from their neighborhood in Kalimantan at the time, and they still suffer a lot of discussion and a lot of discrimination until today. So this is the Islamic minority group. We have Shiite, we have Ahmadiyya, we have the so-called Gafatar members or Gafatar people. One of the founder of this movement is interesting. It is the alumni of UIN Jakarta, of the Islamic State University. So that's why I call Gafatar as an Islamic religious movement that started in the beginning as part of the Islamic movement, and then it's become independent and become a separate movement. And it's all theologically many things to Islam, partly also to Christianity. So it's like a mixture of Islam, Christianity, but most of the theological teaching in this movement came from Islam. So this is Gafatar. So this is one type of the minority or religious minority group in Indonesia. The other type is non-Islamic or religious group that are from outside Islam, and they are basically Christian. And the issue of the religious minority groups from non-Islamic groups mostly related to the issue of the building of the place of worship, either church or Confucian temple, but this is not a big issue, but mostly church. So the issue of the building of church, this is the problem of the non-Islamic minority group in Indonesia. So we have two types of the minority groups here. Now, why this problem emerging? Why people bother? Why people discuss and have some controversies about these minority groups? So it has to do with the changing political situation in Indonesia after 1998. So 1998 is a very important political turning point in our history, because since then we have more democratized political space in which people can establish or create organizations freely, in contrast to the former situation in the order regime in which there was a complete control on the organization or on the civil society organization. So since 1998 we have a democratized political landscape in which people are free to create movement, organization, even political parties, including political parties that are based or grounded or founded upon Islamic ideology. In or during the New Order time, it was completely impossible, for example, for the Muslim to create an Islamic organization or political party based on the Islamic ideology. So at the time, all political parties should follow the ideological framework that was laid down by the state, and there is Pancasila. So if you don't follow Pancasila, if you don't use Pancasila as your ideological foundation of your organization or political parties, you are illegal party. So now you have different situation. So since 1998, we have this massive social and political and even cultural change here, in which people are free to move, to assemble, to speak out, to write, to publish anything they want. And one of the implications of this free political landscape in Indonesia, we call it pasca reformasi, that's the popular word that any Indonesian uses to describe the situation, Indonesia pasca reformasi. Yeah. So Indonesia, the post-reformasi Indonesia is totally different. In this situation, you have this freedom. But then the implication is unexpected, or very surprising for many people. The implication of this freedom is that instead of having an interesting political landscape where you have competition and so forth, you have also democratic competition in the form of election. But that's not the whole story. It's not the whole picture. You have this democratic political competition in the form of the free elections, yeah, which is good. People enjoy it. People, are happy with that competition. But there is also another competition which is very nasty and very ugly, and that is the competition in which you have a radical, nasty in my views, of course, but according to those people who follow that movement, it is good. So there are some other competition in which you have radical organization, movement, and so forth that promote ideologies which in the view of many people are problematic, including the ideology that promote intolerance, exclusivism, ideologies that justify the use of violence in the name of religion, for example. That's kind of thing never happened in the past during the Orde Baru. Only after the fall of Orde Baru that we have this situation where you have this organization promoting intolerant, exclusivist ideologies. And then people started to talk about the so-called phenomenon of intolerance. These days, this topic about intolerance is discussed everywhere. So we have the problem of intolerance today, and that started basically since then, since 1998, when we have this political freedom that allows people to create different kind of organization. So the problem of a minority right actually has to do with this, with the emergence of many religious organizations that promote intolerant ideologies. I started my own organization as well. So as I say to you, that this freedom is freedom that is open for everyone. I mean, if you want to create a progressive, liberal, moderate Islamic organization, you have all liberty to do that. But the radical organization also has the similar freedom to do that. So I started my organization in 2001. I created a movement called Liberal Islam Network as a response to this rising Islamic or religious radicalism in Indonesia. In 1999 till 2001, we have a religious conflict in Maluku, in Ambon, that lasted for more than 1 year, almost 2 years. So this is one of the bitter experience that Indonesians had after they democratized in 1998. And that's very traumatic. So I created this organization in 2001 as in response to this rising religious radicalism and fundamentalism. Yeah. So the freedom is actually a freedom that can be used both ways. Yeah. So the tolerant group can use this freedom to promote tolerant ideologies and ideas, but also you have this other organization, the intolerant organization that can use this freedom as well. So this is the problem that Indonesians are dealing these days. Yeah, the emergence of the social and religious organization that promote intolerant ideologies. But actually, yeah, the story about these intolerant ideologies didn't start at that time in 1998. That's not the turning point. Actually, the history of this rising Islamic, radicalism and fundamentalism went back as far as early 80s. It started with the Iranian Revolution, actually. So, in 1979, yeah, the Mullah revolutions won in Iran, and it's created a turning point for the youth, particularly for the Muslim youth throughout the world, including the youth in Indonesia. So since that time in 1979, there was like an exuberance, a euphoria among the Muslim youth everywhere that we are powerful enough to challenge the hegemony of the West. So this Mullah victory over the secular regime of Shah Iran in Iran at the time was very important, because it's emboldened the self-confidence of the youth, of Muslim youth everywhere. And that's momentous year 1979 started set movement in motions. The movement that was based in mosque. Yeah. So gerakan masjid, or gerakan, the so-called gerakan tarbiyah and gerakan masjid. So at the time, and the proponent, the leaders, the members of this movement are mostly young Muslim students in the secular campuses, and that's explain why, if you study the history of the Islamic revivalism in Indonesia, since early 80s, you have the student movement in campuses that were based in mosque, basically, including here in Gajah Mada. It's based in Salahuddin Mosque. Yeah, Salahuddin Mosque was very among the mosques in the secular campuses that become the base for this new movement. Yeah, among the students. In ITB Bandung, you have Mosque. In other campuses, you have also mosques that were used by the student to start this movement of the so-called Islamic revival that was triggered and inspired by the Mullah revolution in Iran. So that's the beginning of this whole story about the rising of the modern Islamic, let's say, Islamic revivalism, the revival of the Islamic consciousness among the youth to challenge the Western hegemony. Yeah. So actually, that's that one in the early 80s. In early 80s was still the apex of the New Order political power. So at the time, there was no room for this student to do the movement publicly on ground. So mostly they do this movement underground. And I think a decade after that, Hizb ut-Tahrir movement. This is a small group that propagated and and promoted the idea of caliphate state, the Khilafah state. A decade after that, in 90s, they came to Indonesia through a certain missionary activity of this movement that started in Bogor and Jakarta. So that's the beginning of the story of this rising Islamic intolerant ideology. So it started even during Orde Baru, but it went underground. Nobody were aware about this. Few people are aware about this movement at the time, but then when you have political freedom after 1998, it is just like an explosion. So people were surprised that we have many radicals or conservative, intolerant organizations that emerged after Reformasi. But actually, the history started even earlier than 1998, when the New Order regime collapsed. So this is the genesis of this movement. Now we have the problem of the intolerance toward minority groups. Why this intolerance? Why this intolerance? If you study or if you look at the content of the ideology of this Islamic movement, it is very, very interesting. One of the important components of this ideology is an obsession with the Western hegemony. So this new movement are obsessed with, let's say, with the powerful West and the weak Islamic world. So that's one of the basic language that is common among this organization. So West, that is powerful, represented by America, Britain, Australia, and so forth. It's become an obsession for these groups. So this language of anti-Western hegemony is very important, and it's shaped the whole mindset and the whole discourse in this movement. So anti-Western hegemony. And this anti-Western hegemony discourse manifests in many practical ramifications. For example, one of the controversial issues that were discussed over years is the issue of wishing Christmas for the Christian during the Christmas Eve. So not many, but some Muslim organizations view it as something Islamic to wish Merry Christmas to the Christian. Even though, are there any Egyptian students here from Egypt? Okay, so yes, I mean, in Egypt, it is very common for Al-Azhar to send a greeting to the Christian, to the Coptic Christian during Christmas Eve. It's very common. But then, nowadays, you have a new trend in which to show your good credential as a Muslim, you follow this opinion that says that wishing Christian Christmas is haram, is forbidden in Islam. So this is the new trend in Indonesia, and it started actually from a long time ago, even from the New Order time, but it's become very popular today, or these days, as part of this larger discourse of anti-Western hegemony. Because Christmas is identical with the Christianity is at the foundation of the Christian hegemony, so anything Christian is necessarily Western, and anything Western should be challenged. So this, wishing Christmas is, it's a small issue basically, but it's not a small issue for this organization because it is serious, because it's part of the larger discourse of challenging Western hegemony. That's the mindset. So this anti-Western hegemony discourse manifests in this kind of issues, forbidding the wishing of Christmas to the Christian. The other issue is building churches, and this is more serious. Actually, building churches, or the issue of building churches, has been an issue for many years. I mean, even during the time, it was already an issue for many Muslims. So resistance to the building of church has existed in Islamic society for a long time, but then it's become different when we have this new discourse of challenging Western hegemony, because challenging the building of church become part of this discourse of anti-Westernism as well. So for those Muslims who resist this building of church, this building of churches is problematic for them, because church, in the opinion of those Muslims who follow this conservative and fundamentalist organization, building churches is part of this, a reflection of the Western hegemony. Because in the view of many Indonesian Muslims, it's still very common among them that Christianity is identical to the Western hegemony, and it has to do also with our colonial and Dutch colonial history in the past. So the identification of Christianity with Westernism and Western hegemony is very strong, and we can understand that due to this long history of colonialism in Indonesia. So this is one of the practical ramifications of the anti-Western hegemony. So that's the first component. The first component of the ideology of this intolerance. The second component, which is very important in my opinion, is the discourse of me versus them. The mindset of me versus others, me or us as a Muslim versus others, the so-called identity politics. So this is also one of the manifestation of this ideology of intolerance. As Muslim, this under threat versus or vis-a-vis others that threaten us. So this language of threat is very strong, it's very dominant among the groups there. Many discussions that we have these days on national level are framed by this group within this framework of us versus them. For example, currently we have a national debate about the revision of our a civil code that we inherit from the Dutch colonial era, and this has become a national debate. We have a national or civil code, a civil law that was based on the Dutch tradition, and it existed in this land for many years. So there is a plan. Actually, this plan started during Orde Baru, but never materialized, and now it is reopened. So the plan to revise the civil law that came from the Dutch tradition, because many people have serious issues with this law, because it is not a law that represents our culture, our unique culture. This is a Dutch law, so it should be revised. Now we have a new discussion about, for example, the definition of the adultery, the fornication. According to the existing Dutch or civil law that we have, the so-called, what is defined as fornication or adultery is any illicit, extramarital relationships between the married person with others outside the marital relationship. But extramarital relationship between people who are not married, according to this definition, are not considered as adultery or fornication. So this definition, which is basically very secular and European in a nature, become an issue, and there is a plan to revise this definition of adultery, and now it's become debate. If you follow the conversation among the Muslim who are following this ideology of intolerance, this new debate about redefining of adultery are shaped within the framework of us versus them. Why? Because, and this is always the language that they use, the secular bloc, the secular people, the liberal people in Indonesia always try to attack our culture, our Islamic culture, by promoting new values that are not rooted in our tradition. So all debate are framed within this new discourse of us as a Muslim vis-a-vis others, the non-Muslim, who threaten our culture. So that's one of the reasons why we have this new trend of intolerance, because this is for them a justified intolerance. Why? Because why should we tolerate something non-Islamic? This is what they say. Yeah, we cannot tolerate something non-Islamic. I mean, because this current definition of fornication and adultery, for example, we cannot tolerate that. And there was an attempt by a certain group, the alliance of family that's called Aliyah, that tried to revise to do the judicial review of our current civil law to the constitutional court. Yeah. Because according to them, this definition is very un-Islamic. Yeah. So intolerance toward minority group is part of this larger movement of intolerance toward others because others are threatening us. Yeah. And lastly, component of this new ideology of intolerance, which is very important, yeah, is the ideology of exclusivism. This is also the component of this ideology. By exclusivism, I mean a certain kind of mindset or a few something, a kind of mindset that view our religion, our culture, our tradition, our faith as something superior over others. So exclusivism is a manifestation of the triumphalistic view of oneself and others. So people who follow this exclusivist mindset, they feel that their religion are superior to others. Yeah. Not only that, but they have right sometimes this superiority of other faith or of a religion justify the exclusion of others. And this manifests in the persecution of the Ahmadiyya. So why the Ahmadiyya are declared or labeled as the deviant sects or deviant groups or kelompok sat, that's the language that we use here. Why are the Ahmadiyya considered as the deviant sects? Because Ahmadiyya doesn't conform into the existing, definition of the so-called Islamic orthodoxy. Islamic orthodoxy is the representation of the ultimate or absolute truth, and other truths are inferior. So Ahmadiyya is considered as sesat, as deviant, as straying away from the right path, because Ahmadiyya doesn't conform to this definition of the Islamic orthodoxy. Because Ahmadiyya brings the new conception about prophecy that doesn't conform to the Sunni definition of the prophecy, because Ahmadiyya people believe that there is a new prophet of Muhammad, and belief in the finality of the Muhammad prophecy is considered as the cardinal faith of the Sunni orthodoxy. So this exclusivism manifests in this act of excluding Ahmadiyya from, or excommunicating Ahmadiyya from the Islamic orthodoxy. And this exclusion of the Ahmadiyya manifests practically in the form of persecuting them. And then we have, the phenomenon of attack on Ahmadiyya in many places. And that was very, very common during, the 10 years of the SBY's presidency. We had a lot of incidences of persecution of the Ahmadiyya members in many places. And some of the problems still linger until now. So we have, some Ahmadiyya who still who are still suffering from this persecution in Lombok, in Mataram, in eastern part of Indonesia. They are exiled from their villages, and they live in the transitory neighborhood in Surabaya, in East Java, and they stay there for more than 5 years. They cannot go to their villages and live normal life. So this exclusion of the Ahmadiyya is manifestation of this exclusivism. This one of the important component of this ideology of the intolerance. I think as introductions to the problem of minority rights in Indonesia, I think this is enough. So I end my presentation here, and I will open for discussion if any question or clarification, or even if you don't agree with me, please do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We can welcome comment and questions. Just
So, hello, I'm Fajar from Human Rights Organization. So, I already read a lot of human rights bills, whether either in Indonesia or international, about religious freedom, and I found this common value of religious freedom that regulates the relation between sects, between religious groups. But I think that these instruments are sort of overlook the dissonance within those religious groups. So because at least in practically these religious freedom instruments, they don't protect minority that are discriminated or criticized by the, let's say, by the dogma within the group. Let's say, for example, like your group, your organization, Liberal Islam Network. It's also like a dissonance, right, against the dogma. Or on the other hand, like identity group, like LGBT. For example, like in the ones that sometimes do, I mean, they don't separate themselves as a sect or as a special religious groups from the mainstream Islam. They only, they're just really humble. I just want to live, and I just want to believe my faith as a Muslim. But also, I want to believe that my faith is conformed with my identity as a transgender. So it's like really simple demand. But do you think that the religious freedom instruments today are sort of offering those things?
Yeah. So you are right that the persecution is not only suffered by religious groups that declare themselves or consider themselves as a religious group, yeah, but it is also suffered by certain groups that cannot be considered as a sect or a new faith or, you know, a religious group, but just a social organization. Like, as you mentioned, like Pesantren of Waria, Pesantren for the transgender in Jogja that was attacked last year or 2 years ago. 2 years ago, and also my organizations and other like-minded people who founded the similar organization, they suffered also from this persecution. I think one of the implications of this rising ideology of intolerance that that caused many persecution of religious minorities. Also, one of the implications is that the space for discussing and exchanging views about religion are becoming limited. So people simply for saying or for just speaking about or interpreting religious texts in a different way from the orthodox interpretation, they are considered also as a threat. So this discourse of threat has a ramification in many issues. So if you, for example, if you understand Islamic texts, Quran or the Hadith, or if you come out with a different interpretation of the religious text that is not in conformity with the orthodoxy, you have also you have to deal with this persecution as well. You are considered as a threat to Islam, and that's limited. That shrinks the space for the discussion today. But I think there is a changing situation now. I think since the beginning of the administration of Jokowi, there is a turning point, a little bit, a change, because now maybe the government learned from the past administration that were so hesitant in dealing, with these intolerant groups decisively. The new government tried to be more tough on them. And now, with a massive, arrest of people who spread hoax and fake news on media, people start thinking again about promoting these intolerant ideologies. So I think there is a change now in the situation in our interreligious relationship. So the government now is trying to be more tough on the intolerant groups and even put them on jail if they make a trouble. And also, I think one of the important steps that was taken by the government is to make the arrest of people who spread hoax and hate speech, and also messages that are full of hatred. I think it's very important because one of the vehicles through which this organization and this movement promote intolerance is by promoting fake news, hatred, hate speech, even the so-called fitna, fake news, fitna. I think it's almost similar. Yeah, fake news, fitna, yeah, sound similar. So fake news, fitna, that's one of the important vehicles through which this organization movement spread, their messages. So religious freedom still, facing a big problem in Indonesia, but I think there is an important step taken by the government to fix the problem, and I think there are some good result coming from this new policy, I guess. Yeah. So less attack on Ahmadiyya, for example, less attack on discussion organized by the LGBT people. We never heard about that, happening these days. In the past, there was almost every month we heard, attack on this, on Ahmadiyya, on church. I mean, attack on church still occurred from time to time, but in less frequency. Attack on discussion also, it's less often or less frequent than in the past. Yeah. So I think, but this is a big question. My question is whether this new phenomenon of these intolerant groups going low profile these days is a permanent situation, or it is a temporary situation. When there is a change of the government on top level, they will come back. That's the big question. And even my worry, my big concern is that those people who make some trouble in the past, making attack on Ahmadiyya and so forth, they go into hiding these days, but with a very, they have a full anger in their head. Sometime when the momentum comes, they can make comebacks and even do some revenge. Yeah, this possibility of these groups coming back in the future, even doing some revenge and even overturning this policy of the current government, that's very possible. That's my big concern about the next presidential elections. If the next presidential elections brings the new government and brings new policy on the that has to do with minority groups, I'm really concerned about that possibility. Yeah. Any question? Yes.
I'm Shanawaz and I'm from Pakistan, and just want to share two things. First one is, like, when I came to Indonesia, I find that Indonesia is more liberal to compare to Pakistan. And if I consider, like you, I'm more Pakistani people will think like this way, that Indonesians are more liberal and they are not Muslims. But when you are talking among each other and saying, oh, there's religious intolerance is increasing or decreasing, I was surprised to see this. So the comment is like this way. First, when you said that religious intolerance become increased because of the Iranian revolution, that is also one of the surprising how it becomes increases here, because the Iran was Shia,
Yeah.
and even the Pakistan was the neighboring country, and we were Sunni, and even the Arab countries like Saudi, Egypt, they were so surprised because they were thinking that Shia is going to overtake the Sunni countries, because the Iran was going to play a role of the friendly state in the Islam. So the Sunni countries were so afraid from the role of the Iranians. I don't know how that triggered in Indonesia to become, religious intolerance or religious conservatism is increased. Second, what I want to comment also, that after 9/11 or after Arab Spring, what happened when the Western countries started supporting the democracy, like Indonesia, Egypt, like in Libya, in Syria, and then Muslim countries feel like this way, or Muslim groups feel like this way, that these Western countries are going to get us, sooner or later, on the name of the democracy, on the name of the liberty. First they started these things in the Egypt. They came into Tunisia and Egypt, and then Syria, Libya, and then this will happen in what? And then religious groups become so intolerant towards the towards to the Christianity. I mean, we have to also mention these kind of the things, that when some Western actions also triggered that intolerance in the religious group. And they were doing sooner or later is the Indonesia, the Bali attack, you remember that? And then the suicide attack in Jakarta. This happened because not of, that Iranian attack, Iranian revolution, because it's sooner, it's very nearby. And third one I was also on to have is that Ahmadiyya is not only accepted by the Sunni, but it's also not accepted by the Shia, because the Shia also believe in that final end of the prophecy of the Prophet. So the Shia is also not accepted. Then third, I also want to say that in Pakistan, blasphemy law, is very dangerous. If someone just put the blame that someone is abusing Quran or Prophet, the mob can come and kill you. And recently they killed our governor, and just he said that blasphemy law is used by the people. They are taking their personal religions, rather they are using for the religious purpose. And he was immediately killed after 4-5 hours on just going to shopping. So why this religious intolerance is increasing? If we look towards the Prophet or Hadith, when Makkah was conquered, and then the Prophet said, anyone want to go to Hindu's house is safe. Or the son of the Abu Jahl, Ikramah, he was accepted as a Muslim. Then why is this things happening in Muslim? It's because of the Western, I don't want to blame them, but because it's also like they are attacking on the Muslim countries, suddenly the radicalization become triggering and increasing in the Muslim countries.
I think we cannot underestimate how much the power of this anti-Westernism is among this new Muslim movement. It's very, very powerful discourse, powerful language. It instigate, a very emotional response to this perceived Western hegemony among the Muslims. It's a very powerful language, and it has, as I mentioned before, as I discussed before, it has a lot of implication in very practical things in our life. So I might be exaggerating, but in my opinion, anything that has to do with the current act of intolerance toward minority group has to do, first of all, with this discourse of anti-Westernism. Because, and this is the problem, the idea that certain group are deviant, sesat, like Shiite, or in Islamic theological history, there were a lot of Islamic minority sect that was considered by the Sunni Orthodox as deviant, a lot. But the big difference between classical era and the modern era is that in the classical era we didn't have that discourse of anti-certain imperial power outside. The conflict between Sunni and Shia has been there for many centuries, but that was like a domestic issue among the Muslims. It's like an intra-family dispute. But today it is intra-family fight plus this new discourse of anti-Westernism. If you promote tolerance for Ahmadiyya, Shiite and anything, first thing that you would encounter is that an allegation that you are pro-Western, democratic, secular values. right? And this is a manifestation of the Western hegemony. So now I understand why this anti-Westernism ideology is so dangerous, because it is reshaped the whole discussion of the intra-family fight. I mean, Sunni Shiite existed for many centuries. They fight each other, but that's it. That's just fight in the family, within the family. But nothing about, for example, if you fight for the right for the Ahmadiyya or Shiite to exercise their religious freedom, this new language of religious freedom, then it means that you follow certain ideologies, secularism, democracy. I mean, even the idea of religious freedom itself is problematic for those groups. Yeah. So that's the problem, and a big difference. So I do not agree with people who say that, well, Shiite and Sunnite fight each other for many centuries. No, it is not just a fight. This is a new fight. A new fight within the new context of Muslims seeking a revenge, quote unquote, against Western hegemony, because they feel that they deserve to be the leaders of the world, because that's what they saw in the past. For many centuries, Muslim was as the leaders of the world, and suddenly the whole world of the Muslim was like crumbling with the beginning of the modernity. We have the new political entity called national state. We do not have any longer the caliphate state, and so forth. So that's why I think Karen Armstrong wrote a lot of works that touch on this issue. I mean, the trauma of colonialism and modernity, that explain many things. About the Shiite revolution in Iran, triggering this newfound self-confidence among the Muslim youth in many Muslim countries, including Indonesia. Yes, that's odd, because Iranian revolution is Shiite revolution. But at that time, in 1979, the issue of Shiite and Sunnite wasn't that serious. So the victory of Iranian revolution were seen as a positive political event in the Sunni world. And I still remember that one of the leading Muslim intellectual that is now becoming a problematic and a controversial figure, Amin Rais. Amin Rais translated a book authored by the Shiite scholars, by Shiite intellectual in early 80s by Ali Shariati. So Ali Shariati was one of the key figure in the years leading up to the victory of the Iranian Revolution in Iran, and Ali Shariati wrote a lot of book and pamphlet, very, very, interesting pamphlet. I mean, as a literature, it's very interesting. I mean, the style of the writing is very, very, very interesting. I mean, if you read Ali Shariati books and you are still young and you do not become a revolutionary person, then something wrong happened to you. Yeah, seriously. I used to be captivated by the style of Ali Shariati's writing when I was still young, and I admire him as one of the important figure in Islamic world. Yeah. So Amin Rais, who is one of the leading intellectual in Muhammadiyah, translated that book into Indonesian with a long introduction, meaning an introduction with a tone of approval, of course. Yeah. Why he translated if you don't approve of this book? Yeah, of course. Yeah. So yes, it is a Shiite revolution, but it has a very wide resonance among Sunni world. And vice versa. Before the Iranian Revolution, there was a Sunni intellectual who was also influential among the Iranian intelligentsia or Iranian activists during the Shah era, and that is Sayyid Qutb. So Sayyid Qutb, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, wrote also a lot of pamphlet and also has a very interesting style as Ali Shariati. And Sayyid Qutb has also some a lot of sympathy and reception among the Shiite world in Iran as well. Some scholars even speculated that the first embryo of the Iranian revolution in Iran was triggered, among other things, the idea of this such intellectual as Sayyid Qutb in Egypt. And Sayyid Qutb is a Sunni guy, but he triggered, he instigated the embryo of revolution in Iran. I mean, according to some scholars who wrote studies on the genesis of the Iranian revolution, about the blasphemy law, that's I agree with you. This is very dangerous. The problem with the blasphemy law in Muslim countries, we have also blasphemy law in Indonesia here. The problem with this law is that it is a law that, in most cases, is a law whose first victim is always the minority. So it is not a law that is intended to protect minority group, but instead it is a law that discriminate the minority groups. So based on this law, Ahmadiyya were tried, some of the, not only Ahmadiyya but Baha'i members, the Baha'i faith. There was some issue with the Baha'i faith, even though it's not as serious as Shiite and Ahmadiyya, because Baha'i faith members are trying to go low profile in most cases. But there was a case in Lampung, like maybe 10 years ago. A member of Baha'i faith was tried with the charge of blasphemy law, using the current blasphemy law in our legal system. So this is, I agree. In Pakistan also, the first victim of blasphemy law always minority groups. That's why I support, from the very beginning, I support to overturn this current law of blasphemy law, because it is very dangerous, and also the victim of the blasphemy law, excluding Ahmadiyya, Shiite, and others, the so-called Muslim free thinkers, also the victim of this blasphemy law. So I mean, anybody who wants to think freely about religion, they tend to be the victim of this law of blasphemy. But and then if you open up this issue of the blasphemy law, the biggest problem that you have to face is that blasphemy law is a kind of law that we Muslims needed, because this is the only way for us to defend our faith. Again, the issue is about us and them, the discourse of us versus them threatening us. That's explained why even our constitutional court denied the judicial review of the blasphemy law. Even though I know that back then, when this review was tried in our court, the head of the constitutional court at the time was a scholar who was known as a person who supported religious freedom, Pak Mahfud MD. But Mahfud MD denied, the revision of this law, because I know that the pressure from the society is very, very, very big. If you want to resist this law, you risk your life. Other comment or yeah? Yes, you first.
It's about lately news. I'm curious about your opinion about new rule in UN about prohibition of wearing cadar in UN what do you think was is it new limitation of freedom of choice for women, or is it prevention for the threat of radicalism?
Okay, I think we should differentiate between what type of universities is doing this ban. I mean, I differentiate between EIN and UIN and other universities. Why? In my opinion, UIN and UIN is Islamic State University. This university was founded the embryo, the seed of this university started in 50s, and then it's become a very important high learning center or education in Indonesia since 70s during the regime of Suharto. And this UIN or Islamic State University is very important in our history of Islamic moderation and reformism in Indonesia. So the history, you cannot ignore this long history of Islamic reformism and so forth in Indonesia because this institution is at the forefront of this movement to reform the Islamic theological thinking and so forth. And this is very important. So in my opinion, UIN Jogja has done something right to adopt that policy because it is UIN. Why? Because in my opinion, this Islamic State University is the last bastion of Islamic reformism. I mean, if you allow, because one of the important phenomenon after Reformasi is that the secular campuses in many parts of Indonesia become the grooming ground for the radical movement, which is odd in my opinion. I mean, you're supposed to be educating the generation in a critical thinking, but what's happened is that these secular universities become, not all of them, but major secular universities in many Indonesian cities became this, a grooming ground for this radicalism. And UIN is I think, is a very important educational institution in our country that defend the Islamic moderation and Islamic modernity. I mean, if you allow this incursion of the Islamism or Islamist ideology into university, because you cannot deny, even though there isn't any empirical data that show you a connection or close connection between wearing a veil or cadar and affiliation with the radical groups. But if you study the history of the Islamic movement, the kind of Islamic group that promote the wearing of niqab, of veiling, is basically Islamic movement that has relationship with the Salafi ideology. Because no other Islamic group promoted wearing niqab except the Salafi Salafi movement, plus the Shia. This is interesting. In Iran as well, you have niqab as well, right? Yes, yes. But chador is also a practice that is not as common as in Saudi Arabia. But chador is another word for I
whole
think.
body, but
Yes.
the face will remain open.
Yeah.
But in Saudi, it's like the whole, you have to cover.
Yes. So even though there is no empirical, evidence that connect a necessary connection between wearing veil and affiliation with the radical organization, but I think the only Islamic groups or movement that promote the wearing of niqab is only the Salafi organization. No other Islamic movement. And so this is something that should make us think, why is it the case? Why is it the case? So that's why in the case of UIN, I support the policy. But if the policy is adopted by UGM, I might be having a different opinion. Because in my opinion, UIN is this bastion of the Islamic reformism in Indonesia. This is the educational institution where you have the legacy of Professor Harun Nasution, those Muslim reformers. So I think we should defend that tradition in UIN. So the policy in UIN Yogyakarta is symbolic of this defense of our Islamic tradition of reformism in Indonesia. Otherwise, because one of the characteristics of this new Islamic movement that is based on Islamist ideology, intolerant ideology, is that they are so committed. The level of militancy among those organizations are so amazing. You don't find that in any Islamic organization. And this is, for me, I admire the level of militancy among the members of this organization, even though I don't agree with the ideology. But I admire the militancy, the level of militancy. And this militancy makes it possible for them to influence, to penetrate all level of Islamic society, including our educational institution, including our bureaucracy, our big corporation in many big cities, in Jakarta, in Bandung, in other cities as well. So this militancy is there. And I think this militancy has to do also, again, with the ideology of us vis-a-vis them as a source of threat, the ideology of anti-Westernism. Because if you have something big to challenge, you have a big spirit. If you don't have something big to challenge, then you are lazy. And I think that's the philosophy, I guess, yeah. So because those people have something big to challenge, it's very big. It's America. Can you imagine? It's America, and America is symbolic of the whole, system of modern hegemony, and Muslims should challenge that. That's give them a boosting of confidence, militancy, and commitment to the movement as well. Yeah. I imagine that the tolerant Islamic organization have that level of militancy. The problem is that the moderate Islamic organization are lacking in that militancy. Oh yeah. Sorry.
Thank you for your presentation. I like your optimism when saying that intolerance incidents in Indonesia are increasing. While in my opinion, actually, we still see so many intolerant incidents, even in the last month, for example, see LGBT attacks in Aceh, for example, and also the ban of Christian to do social service in Bantul. Not long, maybe a month ago or so.
Attack on the pastor, right? Not.
No, the attack is another things.
Okay.
But before that, we have like for the Christian groups, they want to do like a social service, but it was banned by specific group. But then the last one, we have like the attack of the pastor, but maybe you can call it as a maybe individual incident or part of the group. We don't know like what is actually the result of the investigation. So in my opinion, actually, I don't know. I don't stand with you. It's such kind of optimism, but even like I do see that actually talking about the intolerance incident or intolerance views in Indonesia right now, maybe it is actually transformed. They don't see, they don't do it like in the public agitation or public attack, for example, but it is transformed with the intolerance view that's transferred to, for example, WhatsApp groups within the family, and it is also become such a big problem as well for many people because we argue with our own
family members
related to that, and also many
and as well.
So maybe yes, we don't see it like publicly, but we still see that it's very dangerous because it transferred in many ways, which is right now because of the media and technology. Actually, the tolerance also spreads in a different way. That's first, and second, I really like your statement when saying that. Talking about the intolerance, the first thing that we have to solve is the anti-Westernization. Can you explore that more? Because now, yes, anti-Westernization. Maybe that's the reason why we have still problem in our constitution when try to make like what is that? The judicial review with the custody, for example. Maybe that's the reason, one of the reasons why we still have such kind of problem. Because in the mind of many Indonesian people, they think that it is part of the Western tradition, or maybe modern institution is such a kind of part of the Western tradition that they actually not belong to. That's why they try to I don't know,
challenge
all. But what else we can do? Because I'm now working with a group of women who try to do in the grassroots level, which is the Kandilitas Iman. Because I do think that formal approach is somehow we get stuck already. We try to work now from the grassroots level. From the women who try to help each other to, especially in our surroundings, to tell us about, we say no to intolerance, for example. So,
I think one of the important development in our society today is that the ideology of tolerance morphed into not only ideology but culture. And that's more worrying, I guess, yeah. So it's not just not an ideology as as philosophy or worldview or something like that. It's become part of the daily life, as you mentioned very well before. That it's become the culture in society. It has become the culture, common practice today. To be intolerant of others. And the problem is that to be intolerant signifies the level of your Islamness or Islamicity. I mean, the more you are intolerant, in some groups, the more you are intolerant, the more Muslim you are, or the more become Muslim. You become a Muslim. So this is a problem. That's your level of your commitment to your faith is defined by the level of your intolerance to others, and that's for me is troubling. Yeah, the ideology of intolerance become the culture. But yeah, this is I'm a bit optimist about the future of this of Indonesia in terms of intergroups relationship. even though I know that there are a lot of reason to be a pessimist, yeah. But I think one of the big events that we should celebrate, I guess, yeah, is the fall of ISIS. I mean, the fall of ISIS, I know the fall of ISIS is not the end of the story, but the fall of ISIS is the end of the momentum. The end of the momentum for the preponderance of this intolerant ideology in many Muslim worlds. Yeah. Because I know that many Muslims do not agree with ISIS as a movement, as an ideology, but you like it or not, the fact is that there is a hidden sympathy for this movement, even though not expressed in the public statement. But even among people who do not like this movement, they have some sympathy for this movement, because this movement, for some Muslims, represent the Muslim challenge to the so-called Western hegemony. So this is the only group that dare to take the Western hegemony head on in a military term. That's something that gives them some hope and promise that they might win and they might succeed in bringing about a new system or new world. Yeah. So I think the fall of ISIS is the fall and the end of momentum. That's very important. That's first. The second is that, and this is very important, I think people learn from the ISIS tragedy that the way you interpret and understand Islam is very, very important in determining how you behave as a Muslim. I think that's some people realize that. And the first country that come into that realization is Saudi Arabia, I guess. Yeah. So the current, even though it's everything is about political, conflict within the family of the kingdom, but I think the current change in Saudi policy toward a certain religious institution in this country, I think has to do with the realization that ISIS, which you like it or not, has some close connection with the Salafi ideology, yeah, is the source of danger and should be dealt seriously. So that's what happened in Saudi Arabia. I think the current change of policy in Saudi Arabia partly has to do with the collapse of ISIS, with the realization that you cannot allow these people to shape too much freely, the understanding of Islam among the society in Muslim worlds. Yeah. So that's the source of optimism in my view. You know that when it's come down to the daily life, you still have some problem. I mean, social media that is full of hatred, hate speech, and thing like that is still a big problem. But I think the momentum for this movement to build up, a big movement as in the past, I think is already gone. Even though there is another challenge that is coming up, and that is the political situation in Indonesia, and I want to respond to this also with connection to the comment made by our friend from Pakistan, that if you start democracy in Islamic world, the first group that benefit from this open political situation is mostly the conservative organization. See Egypt, for example. The people who started this movement in Tahrir Square were civil society activists, social media activists, students, civil society leaders, and then it's end up being hijacked later on by the conservative organization, the Salafi Party, and then Muslim Brotherhood Party. So this is the dilemma of the democracy in Muslim worlds, and this dilemma has been predicted very well or discussed very well in Farid Zakaria's latest book, like 5 years ago, The Future of Freedom. Farid Zakaria has predicted this. The problem of democracy in illiberal society is that if you start democracy in society in which illiberal values are dominant, is that when you start open competition in society, you start to open the Pandora box. That's the problem. You start a situation where the social group or social movement that promote illiberal values, intolerance, no respect for the minority groups, for example, they are the beneficiary of this openness instead of the democratic groups. This is the dilemma. This happened in Indonesia, and we learned that. But I think Indonesia managed to survive this challenge a little bit. And I think it has to do with the fact that Indonesia has no such deadlock situation like in Egypt. I'm sorry for my friend from Egypt. Indonesia hasn't have this deadlock situation in which there is a confrontation between two big power blocks in society, military and Islamic movement. In Egypt, you cannot oppose the government except by using religion. Religion is the most effective way to to challenge the government, the autocratic government in Egypt, because there is no other way to do that. Because the government kill all secular opposition. So the only opposition that is left is the religious opposition. And we are a bit lucky in Indonesia that we do not have this deadlock situation. We do not have this military Islamic bloc confrontation that kills democracy. So we have more or less independent civil society organization like NU and Muhammadiyah, which is not completely in opposition to the government, but not also incorporated into the government. So this, middle situation that we have now, I think has benefited us, in maintaining the momentum of democracy. Although we have also the problem of this, the dilemma that Farid Zakaria has discussed, the problem of starting democracy in illiberal society. So, slowly we can handle that, but still my big question, as I discussed before, that what's happen if there is a change in the government, whether this current policy will be maintained or overtaken completely, and then will change the situation. That's my misgiving about the direction of the country in the coming 5 years. It is. Any last question before we wrap up the session? Yes.
We only have 2 questions, but we will have to conclude the session by 3:15. If you can make your question as short as possible, then probably we can have 2.
Yeah. Can we have 2? Yeah.
We can have 2, but probably
So.
short. If they want to start, or even 3, that's
Ask me what's your name and where are you from, and short question. Okay.
Dika, Aditya, and then.
I'll start quickly. My name is Aditi. I'm from Nepal. I have my questions, but let's start. So I don't understand why is there a concept of anti-Westernization in Indonesia, because the concept of democracy was not imposed on the country people through the autocracy. The autocracy was removed by the people, right? So I understand that Muslim religion, the gathering, the communal feeling around all the Muslims in the world, they might have this spread of violence caused by Western countries, as what is the understanding of ours, and then which is also a political international reality right now. So I understand that, but why is it in Indonesia? Shouldn't there be any political reason? Because democracy was not something that was imposed. It was a very good thing in Indonesia. It was not imposed by some other external country to this country. And because of that, do you think that sometimes the anti-Westernization hegemony discourse have sidelined the other important issues like women's rights or other concept of rights, indigenous people's rights? Do you think it has been shadowed now? Because there was this one context when I went to, there was this 1 billion rising campaign, which was about celebrating women's rights, and we were in Malioboro Street, and there was this campaign going on by the youth group, by NGO people, and all of a sudden there were some students from the school students, who came, and then they were protesting against Valentine's Day. And they were saying long live moral. So by the vibes, I asked few people, and they said that they're against the Western idea. And it could be, you could feel that they were protesting against the one who were protesting for women's rights. So this seems like the group of students were against the one who were favoring 1 billion rise campaign, which is not again any Western propaganda. Maybe there is a lot of contributions from the West, but it is something that we need everywhere, right? Women's rights. So do you think that this has developed anti-sentimental values against the concept of human rights, against the concept of rights necessary, like women's rights, reproductive health, women, or LGBT rights? Because of this hegemony discourse, the other rights is sidelined.
Yeah, what we call as Western hegemony is just a label. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the reality, but this label is very important for the sake of, for the sake of strengthening the feeling of unity and militancy against the threat that's come from others. So it doesn't matter whether this Western threat is real or not. It doesn't matter a lot for them. What matters for them is that they need something big to challenge, and then they can label everything as Western, and by doing this, they simplify the complex reality with a very simple word that can explain everything. That's kind of like a conspiracy theory. Basically. So it works like conspiracy theory, a simple theory that can explain everything. So that's how this anti-Western hegemony discourse works in reality. So if you talk about women's rights, reproductive rights, and things like that, it is considered among the Muslim members of this new movement as something not really Islamic. We have a different discourse to deal with. They don't deny women's rights as such, but they have different definition of what is called as human right. Human right doesn't mean that we should deny or reject polygamy, for example. Polygamy, yeah. Polygamy is a big issue these days as a public discussion, yeah. So yes, my way of understanding this new situation is that Muslim, this rise of intolerance everywhere, in my analysis, has to do basically with the initial sentiment against the Western hegemony. It started as a response to this hegemony, to this trauma of the Western hegemony among the Muslims, and it has ramification in many practical issues, yeah, women issues and so forth. It doesn't matter much whether this hegemony is supported by the real evidence or not. Like democracy, I mean, yes, democracy is not imposed by the government, by the Western countries here, but those people have certain way of explaining why democracy become now a dominant system here in Indonesia. I mean, for them, I mean, if you talk to the members of the Hizb ut-Tahrir, for example, who think that democracy is kafir, is not Islamic, they will see that this democracy campaign all over the world is part of this big plan to subdue the Muslim countries under the hegemony of the West countries. So anything else come from that, you know, that's mindset. Yeah. Maybe I might be too reductive in analyzing this complex phenomenon, but as I study the history of the modern Islamic movement and this rising intolerance in many Muslim worlds, I come to that conclusion that this is the trauma of the West, the trauma of the West that you know, that caused the emergence of the identity politics. I mean, I mean, who is to blame? I mean, if you ask them, the West is to blame in the first place, of course, yeah. Even though I don't agree with that, but the West is always the first power blocks to blame that explain anything. So this is like a master narrative that explains everything else. So that's the problem. As I want to reiterate again my point in the discussion that there is a significant different situation that we are facing today. It's not only a conflict between Sunni and Shia. It's not only conflict between Sunni and Ahmadiyya. Yes, it is that conflict that existed for many centuries, but we have the new situation, and that is the identity politic and the trauma of the West. And that makes the current conflict have a different turn and twist. Yeah, that's the different situation that we have today. Yeah. Second, yes, you, I guess.
So I have two questions, but I'm not sure whether the first question is still legitimate or not. But the second question, like discussing about the minority and majority, like for the religious minority, it's not those only limited to those belongs to Ahmadiyya, Shia, or Christian, but those also people from majority who with their stance or defends the minority groups, they become also the minority in the majority.
Yeah. So
sometimes the discussion is how to encourage those people who already stand up to on behalf of the minority to facilitate these two groups to be able more involved in a public arena, for example. Like you mentioned before, like when they discussing about the judicial review for the blasphemy law, you mentioned about the risk that may come to him if he made another decision, for example. So how to encourage this focal point from the majority who can stand up for the minority? Because sometimes from the perspective of minority, we felt we need more people from the majority to stand up. But sometimes when we ask, well, can you speak in public? Can you speak on behalf of us, for example? Again, if related to belongs to a significant organization or you are in certain power, again they decline and there's a lot of risks. But do you have any suggestion on how we can encourage this one? Because I remember the first day when we had a discussion or debate on the majority and minority. When minority do some do some advocacy for their rights, some majority may not understand from the perspective of minority. But when we had someone, one or two people from the majority, that also is not enough. But how we can encourage this kind of people, and maybe this also the first related to the first question regarding the freedom of expression as a justification, or for example, a defense mechanism as a justification for the intolerant groups, or like hate speech or persecution. Like you mentioned about the second reason about us versus them. How you respond to this and how you see this issue, and as people who work in the issue of human rights, how we can build the intersection between this issue and, for example, the religious issue. Because, like in response to the Aditi question, when it comes to human rights, it's always related to the Western, and the agenda is to anti-Western. And how we can deal with this in the real situation.
One of the important battle that Muslims have these days is to defend the universal values that is shared by basically by all people, like the values of tolerance, of respecting others with different faith and opinion, religious freedom. How to defend these universal values not only from the human rights standard argumentation, but also to defend it on the basis of Islamic theological argument. For me, that's very important. Why? Because Muslims do care very much about the validity of anything that they want to do. So Muslims care a lot about that. I mean, if they are convinced or can be convinced that these new values of religious freedom, women's rights, and etc. is founded or has a valid basis in Islamic argumentation, then I think we win the battle. Because that's why actually I'm not that happy with dealing with religious conservatism and fundamentalism merely from the security approach or legal approach. I mean, you put somebody in jail because they violate law, for example. I'm not happy with that, because the problem is not the problem of legal mechanism. The problem is the mindset and ideology, and you have to win the battle, to win the argumentation with the Muslim who are swayed by this discourse of anti-Westernism. How do you sway them into different line of thinking that Islam is not, and this is one of the discourse that is popular today, that Islam is under threat. And that explains why you have the current problem of the massive spread of hoax in the social media, the MCA and so forth. Yeah? Did you follow that discussion about the arrest made by the police of certain people who spread hate speech through the social media? Yeah. So this discourse of Islam under threat is, for me, can be turned into into something dangerous, because it can be turned into instigating hatred toward others and so forth. So so my proposal to solve the problem that you asked is that we have to win the intellectual battle. And that means that we have to have the very solid argumentation from the Islamic point of view. And that's why the reason why I'm very happy with the way the rector of the UIN Yogyakarta explained his policy of banning the veil. It's not merely an administrative steps that he should take to deal with this problem. He tried to give it an Islamic legitimacy by. Do you follow his press conference? The rector of UIN. I think you should see that. Please go to the YouTube, because it's already uploaded on the YouTube. Yeah. See, I mean, just try to watch the way the rector of UIN Yogyakarta explained why he made that policy of banning the veil, and he fit some Islamic argumentation. And that, for me, is very important, because if you take that policy as merely an administrative policy without any religious basis for doing that, Muslim can challenge you. I mean, this is wrong from the Islamic point of view. You need to win the battle theologically and intellectually. And that's why we need people from Muslim side who can produce a new narrative that counter this narrative of intolerance that is current among certain Muslim groups. Yeah, I think we might conclude our meeting today. It's already 3:20. It crossed the line, I guess. Thank you for your patience and attention that you gave. Thank you, and I enjoy the presence here and all questions that is posed to me. So I learned a lot from you, and hopefully that my insight, my contribution here, help you in understanding the current situation in Indonesia. And thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mas Walid. Everyone, for those who have questions and didn't have any opportunity to ask the question today, you can just go to Facebook and go to the recording of the session, and then you can probably ask questions on that. So thank you for your insightful comments. Thank you for your question. Please join me in thanking Mas once again for the and I hope we can have another fruitful session like this in the future. So good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.